There is a videotape from 1998 that almost nobody has seen. A West Virginia cattle farmer is walking along a creek on his own land, holding a camcorder in one hand. The water is running white, not cloudy. White, with a thick foam sitting on the surface like something left in a sink. He turns the camera toward the bank, and there is a dead deer lying in the shallows, then a dead cow, then another. He keeps talking to the camera the whole time, because at this point nobody else will listen to him, not the state, not the vets, not the company whose landfill sits at the top of the hill his creek runs down from. His name was Wilbur Earl Tennant. Over a few years he buried more than 150 head of cattle. He cut some of them open himself and filmed the organs, because he had figured out that nobody would take his word for anything. That tape ended up in a lawyer's office in Cincinnati. What came out of it was one of the longest-running corporate liability cases in American history, and a chemical that is now sitting in the blood of almost every person listening to this. The company was DuPont. The chemical had a boring in-house nickname, C8. Its real name is perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA for short, and for about 50 years it was the thing that made Teflon possible. Not the coating on the pan, the chemical that let the coating be manufactured in the first place. Here is the part that matters, and I want to be clear that this is not speculation. It comes out of DuPont's own internal files, which the company was eventually forced to hand over in discovery, and out of a settlement DuPont signed with the Environmental Protection Agency in 2005. DuPont's own scientists flagged this chemical as a problem in 1961. The company kept using it, kept dumping it, and kept it out of the public record for decades. When the EPA finally brought a case, it accused DuPont of withholding health and contamination information for more than 20 years. The plant sat on the Ohio River, just outside Parkersburg, West Virginia. It was called Washington Works. At its peak, it was one of the best places to work in that part of the state. Good wages, good benefits, a job you could hand down to your son. This is the story of what the people who worked there, and the people who drank the water around there, were not told. Start with the discovery, because the discovery was genuinely an accident. In April 1938, a young DuPont chemist named Roy Plunkett was working with refrigerant gases at a lab in New Jersey. He had a cylinder of tetrafluoroethylene that should have released gas when he opened the valve. Nothing came out. The cylinder still weighed the same as when it was full. So he cut it open. Inside was a waxy white powder that had formed on the walls. It was slippery in a way that did not really make sense. Acids did not touch it. Heat did not bother it. Almost nothing would stick to it, and it would not stick to almost anything. DuPont patented it. They called it Teflon. The first job Teflon ever had was classified. During the Manhattan Project, engineers needed seals and gaskets that could survive contact with uranium hexafluoride, which is aggressively corrosive and destroys ordinary materials. Teflon held. It came out of the war with a reputation as a miracle material, and that reputation followed it into the 1950s. Then came the problem. Teflon was extremely difficult to manufacture at scale for exactly the reason that made it valuable. It did not want to bond with anything, including the equipment used to process it. The fix was a processing aid, a surfactant that would hold the Teflon particles suspended in water during production so they could be handled. DuPont started buying that surfactant from 3M in 1951 and using it at Washington Works. That was C8. It was never supposed to end up in the finished pan in any meaningful amount. It was a tool. And, like a lot of industrial tools, once it had done its job, it had to go somewhere. Where it went was the river, the air above the plant, and a set of unlined pits and landfills in the surrounding hills. Now the timeline, and I want to walk through it slowly, because the dates are the whole case. In 1961, DuPont's own toxicology group ran C8 past laboratory animals. The rats came back with enlarged livers. The in-house scientist who reviewed the work wrote that the material should be handled with extreme care and that contact with skin should be avoided. That is 1,961, 10 years into using it. By the mid-1970s, DuPont knew the chemical was turning up in the blood of its own employees, not in the air around them, in them. It had crossed from the production line into the workforce, and once it was in a person, it did not come back out. C8 does not break down in soil. It does not break down in water, and the human body has almost no mechanism for clearing it. In March 1981, 3M sent DuPont a warning. A study 3M had run showed that when pregnant rats were dosed with C8, their offspring were born with birth defects, including deformities around the eyes. DuPont responded internally. The company pulled women of childbearing age off the Teflon lines. It also went back and looked at pregnancies among women who had already worked in that part of the plant. Of the small group it tracked, 2 babies had been born with birth defects. One had eye defects and a single nostril. The other had defects of the eye and tear duct. None of that was disclosed publicly at the time. Then 1,984. DuPont ran quiet tests on drinking water in communities near the plant on both sides of the Ohio River. C8 was in the tap water. On the 22nd of May that year, at least 11 DuPont officials met at company headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware, to work out what to do about it. A memo from that meeting survives, and it is one of the more revealing documents to come out of the whole case because of how calmly it lays out the disagreement inside the building. It notes that the legal and medical people would probably push for total elimination of the chemical and that they had no reason to take any other position. And it notes that the business side would say the plant simply could not afford that. That is the fork in the road. On one side, the people who understood the risk. On the other, the people who understood the balance sheet. Production continued. So did the dumping. By 1990, roughly 7,100 tons of PFOA-laced sludge had gone into a site called Dry Run Landfill, unlined, sitting above a creek. That creek was Dry Run Creek. It ran down through pasture that belonged to the Tennant family. The Tennants had farmed that land for generations. In the 1980s, DuPont bought a piece of neighboring property from Earl Tennant's brother. The company said it wanted somewhere to put non-hazardous waste. That became the landfill. By the mid-1990s, Earl's herd was in trouble. The cattle drank from the creek because that is what cattle do. They started losing weight and losing hair. Their teeth turned black. Calves were born deformed. Cows would stagger and drop for no reason a farmer could name, and Earl had been around cattle his entire life. He watched more than 150 of them die. He went up the creek and found the discharge point. Water coming out foaming and discolored. He started filming. Every dead animal, every autopsy he performed on his own kitchen table with a hunting knife, every bubbling stretch of water, narrated in a flat Appalachian accent by a man who is clearly furious and clearly aware that nobody official is coming. He did try the official route first. He called the state. He called federal agencies. He got a veterinary review that concluded, in writing, that the cattle deaths came down to poor husbandry. Bad farming. His fault. In a town where a very large share of the good jobs came from one employer, Earl Tennant became a problem. Neighbors stopped talking to him. He got the sense that people wished he would drop it. He did not drop it. In October 1998, he called a lawyer in Cincinnati named Rob Bilott. Bilott was, at that point, exactly the wrong lawyer for this. He worked at Taft Stettinius and Hollister, an old-line corporate firm, and he had spent his career on the other side of environmental cases, defending chemical companies against exactly this sort of claim. Tennant only got through the door because of a family connection. Bilott's grandmother lived in Vienna, West Virginia, not far from the Tennant farm, and she knew the family. It was a personal favor, more or less. Bilott drove down, expecting a straightforward nuisance complaint. Then he watched the tapes. Bilott filed suit in 1999 and did what he had learned to do from the defense side. He asked for documents. All of them. Not just the ones about the landfill. Everything DuPont had on whatever it was putting into that creek. DuPont fought it. Bilott got a court order, and then boxes started arriving at his office. Around 110,000 pages in the end. Memos, study results, internal correspondence going back decades, dumped on him in no order at all. He read it, not a team of associates, him, at a desk, for months, building a timeline out of paper. That is where the 1961 rat study surfaced, and the 1981 birth defect warning from 3M, and the 1984 water tests, and the Wilmington memo. What Bylot understood, and what made this different from a dead cattle case, was that C8 was not just in the creek. It was in the drinking water of tens of thousands of people who had no idea the chemical existed. It was in wells, in public water districts, in the taps of 6 water systems across 2 states: Little Hocking, Ohio; Belpre, Ohio; Lubec, West Virginia; Mason County; Tupper's Plains; Pomeroy. There was no legal limit for C8 in drinking water, because there was no legal limit for a chemical almost nobody outside the industry had heard of. It was unregulated. It had been unregulated the entire time. In 2001, Bylot put the whole thing in a letter and sent it to the EPA and to the Department of Justice, along with the documents. That letter is the reason any of this is public. The tenant case settled. Bylot then filed something much larger, a class action on behalf of everyone whose water had been contaminated by the plant, roughly 70,000 people. The case is known as Leach. DuPont's position throughout was that the science did not show harm at these levels. That was the wall. To get past it, someone had to actually establish whether C8 in drinking water made people sick, and no such study existed. So the 2004 settlement did something unusual. DuPont agreed to fund an independent science panel, chosen jointly by both sides, with a mandate to answer that question. DuPont also agreed to fund medical monitoring, and critically, both sides agreed in advance to be bound by whatever the panel found. To make it work, researchers needed data from the affected communities. They ran what became known as the C8 Health Project, and about 69,000 people gave blood and completed health questionnaires. Participants were paid for their time, which is part of why the response rate was so high. It is, to this day, one of the largest studies of its kind ever conducted on a single chemical exposure in a single population. Then everyone waited. 7 years. The panel's findings came out between late 2011 and October 2012 in stages. It concluded there was a probable link between C8 exposure and 6 conditions: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and preeclampsia. Because of how the settlement was written, DuPont could not now turn around and argue the science. It had agreed to be bound. That opened the door to thousands of individual personal injury claims from people in those communities who had one of those 6 diseases. Before the panel even reported, the federal government had already moved. In December 2005, DuPont settled with the EPA. The agency's case was not about poisoning anyone. It was narrower and, in a way, more damning, that DuPont had failed to report what it knew when the law required it to. Test results, contamination findings, health data. DuPont paid a civil penalty of $10.25 million and agreed to spend another $6.25 million on environmental projects, $16.5 million in total. At the time, that $10.25 million was the largest civil administrative penalty the EPA had ever collected under any federal environmental law. DuPont's revenue that year was in the range of $27 billion. In 2015, DuPont spun its performance chemicals business into a separate publicly traded company called Chemours. The Teflon operation went with it. So did a large share of the legal exposure. Chemours would later argue in court that it had been handed liabilities it was never equipped to carry. In February 2017, DuPont and Chemours settled about 3,550 personal injury cases for $670.7 million, split evenly between the 2 companies. In 2021, DuPont, Chemours, and Corteva put another $83 million into resolving the remaining Ohio litigation. In June 2023, the same 3 companies reached a settlement with public water systems across the United States worth roughly $1.185 billion to help pay for filtering these chemicals out of municipal supplies. Add all of it up and it runs into the billions. Now the other column. Criminal charges filed against any individual involved. None. Executives who went to prison. None. Every dollar of that came out of shareholder money and insurance. The people who sat in the Wilmington conference room in May 1984 and decided the business could not afford to stop are not in any of these court records as defendants. Here is where it stands today, which is the part I find hardest to sit with. C8 itself was phased out in the United States years ago, but it was one compound in a family of thousands. PFAS, they are called collectively, and the industry response to regulatory pressure has largely been to move to shorter chain versions with different names. Gen X is the best known. Whether those replacements are meaningfully safer is still being argued. The chemicals do not leave. That is the entire design feature that made them commercially valuable, and it is the reason they are now in rainwater in Antarctica, in the livers of polar bears, in umbilical cord blood, and in breast milk. The Centers for Disease Control has found PFAS in the blood of nearly every American it has tested. In 2024, the EPA finally set an enforceable national drinking water limit, 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. 4 parts per trillion is roughly 4 drops in 20 Olympic swimming pools. That is how little of this material it takes to matter. Then, in May of 2026, the EPA proposed changes. The 4 parts per trillion limit for PFOA and PFOS would stay, but water systems could ask for 2 extra years, pushing the compliance deadline from 2029 to 2031. The agency also proposed rescinding the limits it had set on 4 other PFAS compounds, including Gen X. The public comment period on those proposals runs to the 20th of July, 2026, so the number holds. The clock moves. Earl Tennant did not live to see any of it. He died of cancer in 2009, before the science panel reported, before the settlements, before the film that was eventually made about the case. His wife died of cancer too. Their neighbors mostly stopped speaking to them years before that, because the plant was the plant, and the plant was the jobs. He was right the entire time, and being right cost him almost everything he had. What I keep coming back to is the 1984 memo. Not the dumping, not the cover-up, the memo, because it does not read like a crime, it reads like a meeting. 2 departments, 2 positions, one of them expensive. Somebody in that room said the business could not afford to stop, and for 40 years they were right about that. It was cheaper to keep going. If you want a measure of what that decision was actually worth, take a blood sample from anyone you know. If you know someone who worked at a plant like Washington Works, or who grew up drinking water downstream from one, leave it in the comments. Those stories are how this channel finds the ones nobody has told yet. Subscribe if you want to see where we go next.